Welcome to Discover with Dr. Dan, the Proactive Health Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Brilliant, an innovative proactive wellness company that helps people to live a happier life by discovering and using bioactive natural ingredients. See feelbrilliant.com for more information. We are delighted to have Dr. Jillian Stansbury with us today. Dr. Stansbury is a medical director of Battleground Healing Arts located in Battleground, Washington. She has served as a professor of botanical medicine and natural products chemistry at the National University of Natural Medicine in Portland, Oregon for over 30 years, and in 2019 was granted the prestigious Order of the University Award for her academic achievements. She is the author of 7 books, including an academic textbook series entitled Herbal Formularies for Health Professionals, published by Chelsea Green. Dr. Stansbury has also conducted natural products and ethnobotany research in the Peruvian Amazon for over 15 years and has been awarded several ethnobotany research grants to document her explorations with a number of indigenous tribes. Her medical clinic operates an extensive apothecary, the Healing Arts Apothecary, that can fill orders and custom formulations and can be found at www.healingartsapothecary.org. Dr. Stansbury, it's so great that you would take time out of your busy day to talk with us.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's a delight. So let's talk a little bit about natural products or bioactive compounds in plants and their importance in medicine. As we've seen from your bio, you've extensively traveled the world talking with indigenous cultures and traditional medicine healers. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we are naturally acclimated to natural products. We've evolved from the plant realm and became more and more complex organisms, so our bodies readily receive natural compounds like foods. And like so many drugs are powerful and have their place in medicine, to rely on them often is not promoting to health in a deep restorative sort of way. Often they're Band-Aid therapies, or they can rescue us and have heroic effects, but they have detrimental effects, side effects, toxicities, liver burden, impaired bone density, stomach ulceration, and a litany of other problems. And while not all natural products are without side effects by any means, they are definitely more food-like. So if we look at a continuum of substances which have great toxicity and substances which are greatly nourishing, herbs are going to be placed more on the food-like continuum. So we can use them to restore, rejuvenate, renourish, rebuild our body in ways that few pharmaceuticals can. So our biochemistry readily receives natural products from plants. They have not only the key active ingredient, and that's what a lot of the research looks for, does it block an ACE inhibitor, like talking about coronaviruses and things that's been in the news all the last year. You can look at those single mechanisms and look for that pharmaceutical or pharmacologic activity. But when you use a whole plant, you really get probably 1,000, if not 1,000,000 different pharmacologic types of products or constituents therein, and those are complementary, they're synergistic. So there might be 1 or 2 big important molecules that do 1 or 2 big important things, but in that whole synergistic complex of the plant, you have enzymes, you have fiber, you have vitamins, you have minerals. So they're truly nourishing and restorative to the body. Along that same line, it could be a problem if we think we're too smart and try to outsmart nature and remove those active compounds and give them in bigger dosages. And it's not always a bad idea. Like we might do that with vitamin D, or we might do that with vitamin A or B vitamins or something. So in certain circumstances, we can concentrate out the nutrients out of plants and give a bigger dose of vitamin A or vitamin D than you might get from eating bowls full of mushrooms to get all that vitamin D, for example. But in other cases, we might see more toxicity from plants if we just attempt to isolate out their active alkaloids. Like taking caffeine pills is probably not a good idea to boost your energy, while drinking a cup or two of green tea actually has a lot of beneficial effects. Even though it gives you caffeine, it doesn't seem to be too hard on our body or nervous system or raise our blood pressure or give us heart palpitations like you might if you just concentrated out the caffeine and took it. Using that as an example, that most people would be familiar with the difference between concentrated caffeine and what that feels like, and a cup of green tea and what that feels like.
Great. I love the concept that you mentioned, which in my layperson term is polypharmacology, right? Where you use many different compounds from plants to hit many different receptors in the body, causing a beneficial response. So I love that. The other thing that really struck me is you were talking about natural compounds and kind of the link to medicine. And it's interesting that about 50% of all pharmaceutical drugs come from natural products, compounds, and plants. So that's really interesting.
It does, and it still is a big arena in natural products chemistry, is to look for new mechanisms from plants and try to understand them down at really fine minutia of ion channels and ACE receptors and genes, what regulates genes and upregulates or downregulates them. And interestingly, a lot of that research is not really done by herbalists or people who even embrace the philosophy of natural medicine. It's done for drug discovery, to try to learn the shape and the mechanism of action of molecules and then manipulate them. And some good will definitely come from that, but it's almost like disparate arenas of research going on, how to eat whole foods and incorporate herbs as medicines and herbs as medicinal foods into your lifestyle versus looking for that big gun or that magic bullet kind of molecule that then you can patent and own. And very different kinds of research arenas that do those kinds of fields.
Interesting. So let's now talk about heart health. Heart health is obviously very important. So as a doctor, describe to us the importance of heart health. I mean, we all understand a little bit, but really, what is the importance of heart health in the aspect of overall human health?
Well, as most listeners might be aware, heart disease is often one of the lead killers, as we say, in epidemiology or just general mortality. Statistics show that all of us will develop some degree of weakened heart function as we age. And we can age much more quickly with diabetes, with smoking, with oxidative stress, and we can have something that's like a 90-year-old heart when we're only 40 or something. And so almost everyone will have aging catch up with us in a variety of ways, from the stiff knees when you go up and down a mountain trail or weakening of the heart. And a lot of the diseases of aging are due to oxidative stress. Oxidative stress, you might have covered it in other of your guests or panels or podcasts, is basically just a measure of metabolic stress in the body. We all have on a daily basis production of natural compounds that are normal from our own metabolism, that if we don't clean them up well, actually injure our cell membranes and injure our tissues. And that's the role that antioxidant vitamins play. And that's the oxidant that bioflavonoids in our fruits and our vegetables play to protect us from those normal oxidative stresses. So basically, they're just molecules that are unstable or unsteady, and they'll bind onto a cell membrane, and in doing so, they injure that cell membrane. And that's a normal part of cell aging, and we sacrifice some of those cells and just rebuild and renew. So in a healthy body, we're constantly recycling ourselves, and our ability to clean up those damaged, injured, spent cells, spent mitochondria, spent DNA, we can basically repair and regenerate ourselves just as fast as we're liberating some of those oxidative stresses and damaging cells. As we age, that becomes harder to fully repair ourselves. And this is true not only for the heart, it's true for the brain, it's true for our joints and connective tissue, it's true for our kidneys. And when we can't fully repair and liberate and generate or synthesize a new heart cell or a new kidney cell or a new brain cell, the body does the next best thing that it can. It just glues the functioning cells together with a little bit of scar tissue. In medicine, we call that fibrosis, or in the liver, we use the term cirrhosis of the liver. So on the vein and artery walls and in the coronary blood vessels, those are the big blood vessels that deliver blood and oxygen to the heart muscle itself. And then in the heart, individual heart muscles that are supplied with their own blood supply, the vein and artery walls can be damaged by oxidative stress. And so this is the normal process of aging, but we hope we don't sort of weaken and become fibrotic and stiff till we're 90, 100, and live our full expected lifespan. But there's a lot of difficulties we know, or obstacles that cause more stress to the heart, or more aging of the heart, or more deposition of those fibrotic substances at a younger age. We know, of course, smoking, how damaging that is to the body, and nicotine can have direct damaging effects, but a lot of it is just if every lungful is only part oxygen and is part resins and tobacco and other kinds of blood gases that are not purely oxygen, that's going to age the vein and artery walls. As you become replaced by that fibrotic gluing together of your cells, your endothelial cells, they lose their elasticity, or the heart becomes more stiff and it just can't squeeze any longer. So if you know that it's fairly easy to wring out a wash rag or something, it's supple, it's pliable, you can fill it with, have it behave like a sponge and quickly wring it out and it will spring right back to life again. Imagine trying to do that with a pair of blue jeans or something, how hard you would have to squeeze water out, and when you let go, it's not going to spring back to life like a sponge does. So basically, a lot of heart disease has to do with loss of elasticity to the vein and artery walls, replacement of functional muscle cell with scar tissue. And some of the main stressors are not only smoking that I've mentioned, but what we call metabolic distress or metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is when we have challenges to our overall contents of the bloodstream to carry too much fat. That's like high cholesterol, high triglycerides, referred to in medicine as hyperlipidemia. And then that can be a double or triple whammy if you add on to that high blood glucose. That's diabetic, or the pre-diabetic state, where we carry too much sugar in the blood and we can't move that sugar out of the blood into cells so it can be utilized as a fuel. And then the triple whammy is if you have high blood pressure as well, because high blood pressure just has that constant pressure on the endothelial, the vein and artery wall linings that also age it or make it sclerose or fibrose. So there's a lot of discussion about how to control metabolic syndrome, bring the blood sugar into healthy control, bring blood pressure down, and keep an eye on your blood pressure, because we don't really feel those things. And that's one of the sort of sneaky things about heart disease is we're not motivated by pain. Like often if you have a splinter in your foot or something fairly minor, it's just so uncomfortable, you're going to do something about it. Sadly, having high blood pressure is not very uncomfortable, or having high blood sugar is not very uncomfortable. So it's easy to ignore doctors' warnings because you can kind of ignore it throughout the course of your day. And when food can be a reward, or when it is almost feels more painful to exercise, it's kind of a conundrum where we like to avoid pain, and you go out and exercise and it kind of hurts, because if you're not conditioned well, it kind of is stressful and uncomfortable to the body to make yourself run or to make yourself do a heavy chore that you're unaccustomed to. It's uncomfortable. So it's easy to quit. So all of those kinds of diseases are easy for us to ignore for years on end, while the kind of silent killers of high blood pressure and high blood fats and high blood cholesterol and glucose do extensive damage to vein and artery walls. And once you've lost your elasticity, there's no known cure for that. Like, people have heart transplants and something extreme and heroic like that, but there's no pharmaceuticals, there's no known remedies to reverse hardening, quote, of the arteries or reverse heart disease once it's full blown. So back to herbs and back to your healthy living kind of podcast and focus here. We're all about lifestyle, all about keeping active to keep your heart healthy, about using some of those herbs that we know that protect the vein and artery walls, like the bioflavonoids that are in juices, berries, even chocolate. You might have heard of some of the resveratrol that comes in chocolate, and a few other natural products are some of those molecules that protect us. They're antioxidant and protect the vein and artery walls. Aim for good fats like olive oil and fish and plant and seed oils, as compared to French fry oils and fried food oils that contribute to more plaque buildup and more hardening of the arteries. So a lot of it is lifestyle choices that people need to be educated and motivated to embrace as a lifestyle, because you can't feel when your vein and artery walls are really having buildup, or when your blood sugar is high until it's very, very high, or your blood pressure is very, very high. But some of them are called the silent killer because they're so invisible to us.
Yeah. So speaking of herbs, you mentioned herbals in helping to combat this plague of metabolic syndrome that is sweeping the earth. What herbals could help us here, and natural bioactive compounds from these herbals?
Yeah. There are many to choose from, and some might be individual, specific for different individuals. Some that are all-purpose would be those bioflavonoids, pomegranate juice and blueberries and blackberries, beets. Almost everything with a bright red or blue or purple color are very rich in certain types of flavonoids that protect the artery and the endothelial cells from plaque damage, from oxidative stress. So if you could eat one of those foods or more every day, if you could replace alcohol and sugary drinks and soda pop with some kind of a beverage that has pomegranate juice in it, or some fresh blueberries or smoothies. And we even do need to probably watch out for too much sugar. So I don't mean to go get a great big quart of sweetened grape juice or something like that. A good recommendation is to use one of those high quality pomegranate juices and just put an inch in the bottom of a glass and top it off with herbal tea, or top it off with sparkling mineral water. So those bioflavonoid herbs, the rich, colorful berries, are foundational for all of those issues that everybody could benefit from. Other things that everybody could benefit from are the good nuts and seeds: flaxseed oil, evening primrose oil, pumpkin seed oil, and try to replace any fried foods or any fatty foods with use your fat separately on your vegetables. Don't fry your vegetables in oil. Heating things up to a high temperature creates less desirable fats than does putting a cold stored oil on like a salad dressing. So just try to watch the ratios, limit the fried foods to special treats and the dairy and the fatty meats to minimal, and you can have all of the flaxseed oil you want put in your smoothies or stirred into your oatmeal or made into a salad dressing. That would be another all-purpose approach. Okay. Other herbs that are important, I think, are liver herbs. There's an old saying in naturopathic medicine, if in doubt, treat the liver. And that's because the liver helps with almost every metabolic or nutritional or disease or inflammatory diagnosis you care to mention. Helping your liver will help treat it. Skin diseases and hormone problems and acne and high cholesterol and high blood pressure. So talking about metabolic syndrome and heart disease is no exception here. And our liver is busy, a busy organ filtering out toxins and pollutants and food additives and poisons that we're exposed to. It's the liver's job to break down fats. Bile will break down fats into tiny little particle sizes that we can absorb and utilize and benefit from. So if you have insufficient bile or insufficient liver function, you can't really metabolize and recycle your cholesterol or fats or triglycerides. The liver also plays a very important role in blood pressure regulation. The liver plays a very important role in blood glucose. It helps maintain carbohydrate balance and helps store sugars or release sugars, and plays a role in blood sugar balance overall. So liver herbs tend to be bitter roots for the most part: dandelion root, burdock root, yellow dock root. Any or all of those, many of them are backyard weeds if your listeners care to study up and learn how to make your own dandelion root teas or dandelion green salads and stir fries and things. Wonderful medicines. But also in any kind of a protocol, you might include one prong of liver support. Turmeric and milk thistle are other herbs. Berberine, that's one of those compounds that is extracted from Oregon grapefruit. Berberine has wonderful research on it for normalizing blood sugar, for blood cholesterol. It's available in kind of proprietary capsules of various sorts to include in your overall protocols for preventing heart disease, slowing down the progression of heart disease, getting your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your diabetes under control. One or more of those liver herbs would be wonderful complements to some of the other herbs you might consider.
So what about coffee and tea? There's a lot of opinions thrown about here recently. Coffee and tea for heart health and liver health. What's the science there?
I think the science is ever emerging and ever evolving, but coffee does have some benefits. Coffee has chlorogenic acid, and chlorogenic acid actually reduces cholesterol and helps your liver break up that fats into tiny particle sizes, like we were saying. It's anti-inflammatory and it's a potent antioxidant. So that's the good things about coffee. There's bad things, however, in that it's an acid that is irritating to the stomach. It can make your blood pressure go up because it's such a strong sympathetic nervous system, meaning kind of amphetamine-like substance that anybody can feel. If you drink 2 or 3 cups of coffee in a row, you can feel that. And some people will have their blood pressure shoot up or even get heart palpitations from coffee, and they know they can't tolerate it. And then coffee is also a diuretic, meaning it makes you urinate more, but that is a problem because you lose some of your minerals, your potassium, your magnesium. So all of that your liver and your diet and your body tried to absorb, your kidneys might say, oh no, I didn't get to hold on to that fast enough because you have 3 cups of coffee going through you and your kidneys just could not capture them. So we lose a lot of minerals when we have excessive caffeine on board. So there's a little bit of good to be said about coffee, but I think all things in moderation, and I do like my coffee. I like to start the day with a cup of coffee, and I am willing to switch to other teas a couple times a week, but that's my bar, a couple times a week without.
Okay. So I've been thinking a lot about what you're saying. And for our listeners, I don't like the word diet at all. If someone wants to really help improve their overall metabolic health, what would be an example of a metabolic health regimen? What would be examples of what you would eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
I think a lot of my patient population is, as you suggest, somewhat resistant to the notion of diet, as in I myself, I like to enjoy what I enjoy and not worry about it too much. So I think a different philosophy is to encourage consumption of plentiful fruits and vegetables. So instead of taking things away or taking things off the list, if you work instead to try to aim to get 8 to 10 different vegetables per day, it ends up crowding out naturally the less desirable foods. And of course, we do want to limit pulling through the fast food or to eat junk food or to drink soda pop. And I think everybody knows that. So if you instead inspire people, this is a great beverage, you're going to love it. Here's some ideas for getting all these vegetables into the diet. So a breakfast might include something that might be akin to a stir fry. Some of the traditional breakfasts are not that healthy. The bagels or the donuts or the granola, et cetera, is probably not ideal. So if we're encouraging plentiful vegetables, even at breakfast, it might be something like some mushrooms, an onion, a slice or two of zucchini, and some red bell pepper, all on your skillet with a little bit of water just to water saute, or a little bit of a good quality oil. And that could be a breakfast as is, or if you want to add an egg on the side once the vegetables are soft. Or a typical way of making a frittata is to saute those vegetables, and once they're ready, you just put some spinach on top of it, and then you whisk 2 or 3 eggs. This is more of a portion for 2. Whisk 2 or 3 eggs up in a bowl and just pour that scrambled eggs all on the top of your skillet, and it will cook it into a little frittata. So then you just cut that in half, serves 2 people, and you have your cup of tea and a slice of melon or something on the side. So there you've got your 4 vegetables into breakfast. Salads or something for lunch are ideal, or snack types of things, some nuts and a slice of hummus and peppers, or broccoli or cucumber. It depends what people's lifestyle is, but I tend to eat a larger dinner just because I have more time and I'm busy during the bulk of the day, as are a lot of my patients. So you make extra at your dinner, so you have a little piece of chicken breast left over, you have a little piece of your trout or your salmon left over, and that goes on leftover salad, or that goes on that little snack tray with your hummus and your handful of walnuts and some red pepper and carrot sticks and a little piece of leftover salmon or something of that sort. Easy lunch, and it packs well if you're packing a lunch to work or you're packing school children's lunch. And then dinner, that's where I will put my main attention for cooking, and I like to make larger things that will last a couple of days. Or put more attention into it on Sunday, and maybe hard-boiled 12 eggs, and then I have a dozen eggs to go into those lunches or that lunch tray all for the rest of the week, or to go on my lunch salads in the midweek. Make a big pot of vegetable stew or a meat stew if you're not a vegetarian. Just a little bit of meat flavors things in a lovely way, or bone broth kinds of bases in with kale and beans and lentils or broccoli, kind of whatever is handy or out of the garden and fresh. And I like to do 1 raw vegetable and 1 or 2 cooked vegetables. So it could be a roasted cabbage and cauliflower. It could be half of a baked squash and some Brussels sprouts. And then a salad with just everything in it. Grated carrots and some celery and some onions and some lettuce and peppers. I like apples. I love to put a little bit of something sweet in my salads. I'll chop up an apple, or if I have pear slices. On those Sunday cooking days, I might boil up 6 big beets just till they're soft enough to stick a fork in. And then 1 of those might be beet slices that go on dinner that night. And then the remaining 4 or so might go into a Tupperware container that go in my lunch salads, or go in my dinner kind of salads for the rest of the week. So it's a real simple whole foods kind of cooking that emphasizes the vegetables. And I do like meat myself. That's a personal choice. I do have plenty of patients who are complete vegans or vegetarians that would just use my options minus the salmon. My partner is a salmon fisherman, so we fill up our freezer of salmon every summer and then get 1 or 2 out. Oops, my cat decided to join us. Sorry.
Hello.
I'm sitting on the floor.
So that's amazing. The eating regimen, the different foods, I could just picture in my mind. I'm a chemist and I love molecules, right? There's nothing I love than a better molecule. And I just picture in my mind all the different bioactive compounds that are floating around in these foods that you mentioned. When you combine them together, it really does epitomize the good food is medicine concept.
Indeed. Indeed. So then even if somebody just has to have their cookies or their ice cream or has a certain affinity for needs a burger once a week or something, if you're getting those protective effects of all those phytonutrients and all that fiber and all those antioxidant vitamins, even our vice foods seem to do better.
Wow.
We can tolerate better if we're good most of the time.
Well, this has been amazing. One of the purposes of this podcast is to give people actionable information that they can do. It's not just science, but it's things that they can focus on. And this has been like drinking out of a fire hose. It's given us a lot of really good information. So, Dr. Stansbury, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for all the information you shared with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yep.
Happy trails.
Yep. Thank you. And thanks to our listeners. I hope you found this as beneficial and helpful as I have. If you like this podcast, please leave a review. Let us know how we're doing. And thank you again, all of you so much. And thanks again, Dr. Stansbury.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And this is Dr. Dan signing off. The information presented by guests in this podcast is their sole opinion and in no way represents the views of Discover with Dr. Dan, the Proactive Health Podcast, or Brilliant. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not replace professional medical care. Please consult with your medical doctor before making any changes in your lifestyle.